Hey there, history lovers and insomniacs. Tonight we're stripping away the shining myths of medieval knighthood to reveal the hard, cold truth that lurked beneath all that polished steel. Forget the fairy tale jewels and courtly romances. What you're about to hear is the story of bruises hidden under chainmail, sleepless nights spent on straw mats, and the grinding work it took to survive in a world where glory was little more than a sales pitch for the next bloody campaign. If you've ever pictured a knight as a flawless hero riding into sunset, stay with me. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why knighthood was less about honour and far more about pain, duty, and a lifetime of dangerous service. Chapter 1. Your path to knighthood begins not with a sword, but with a farewell. In the Middle Ages, a boy destined for the order of chivalry left his family when he was scarcely old enough to hold a quill. Around the age of 7, parents, proud but practical, sent their son to live in the household of a noble lord. There were no long goodbyes or framed portraits to carry along. A rough cloak, a small bundle of clothes, and a pat on the shoulder were the only tokens of home. Readiness didn't matter. What mattered was obedience, because the first step toward becoming a knight was surrendering childhood itself. The castle that swallowed you was no romantic fortress of shining banners. Its grey towers rose like cold fingers against the sky, promising both opportunity and relentless hardship. As a page, you were less a future warrior and more a servant in training. Days began at dawn with the scrape of boots on stone and ended long after sunset with aching limbs and blistered hands. You fetched water, carried messages, cleaned the mud from boots, and learned to stay invisible while nobles bickered over politics and wine. On lucky days, you were allowed to polish armour, which sounded glamorous until you discovered that polish meant scraping dried mud and horse dung from heavy iron plates until your knuckles cracked. Training hid inside these chores. Wooden swords were handed out like brooms, and sparring sessions left arms bruised and egos battered. You practiced falling from a horse without breaking your neck, an exercise so frequent it felt like gravity itself was your harshest instructor. No one praised you for courage, they scolded you for weakness. Discipline ruled every corner of your life. Speak only when spoken to. Bow deeply to anyone of higher rank. Mistakes earned more than harsh words. Sometimes a slap, sometimes days of the most humiliating labour. One boy who forgot to remove his cap before the lady of the house spent 2 days kneeling in the chapel, praying for humility while the rest of you memorised the lesson. Education existed, but it was a privilege, not a right. Wealthy families might hire a tutor to teach reading, writing, and scraps of Latin useful for church services or inscriptions on tombs. Poorer pages relied on sharp ears and quick memory, copying prayers and letters when scraps of parchment became available. Muscle and obedience still mattered far more than literacy. Yet every small skill, whether balancing a platter during a feast or standing perfectly still during a long church service, was part of a larger apprenticeship and survival. Faith was woven into every morning. The castle chapel stayed cold year-round, breath misting in the frigid air as you knelt on stone floors through endless prayers. Priests preached divine purpose and holy duty, and you nodded along, struggling to stay awake while silently praying not to fall ill. Illness was a constant threat in an age with few remedies and fewer recoveries. Meals offered little comfort: coarse bread, hard cheese, maybe a sliver of salted meat if the kitchen was generous. Vegetables were often avoided for fear of disease, leaving young stomachs to survive on heavy grains and salted rations. Feast days, when a roast pig or honeyed oatcake appeared, became memories you savoured for months. Evenings brought a flicker of warmth. Minstrels sang of Arthurian heroes and dragon-slaying saints while you hovered near the fire, half listening, half fighting sleep. Those songs were meant to inspire, but exhaustion dulled their magic. You thought less of glory and more of your sore feet, though a quiet part of you still hoped that one day someone might sing of your deeds. Nights offered little rest. Pages slept shoulder to shoulder on straw pallets that smelled of sweat and mildew, rising without complaint when summoned to serve unexpected guests or late-arriving riders. A knight had to be ready at any hour, and that readiness began long before armour ever touched your skin. Through it all, small friendships formed like secret alliances, shared glances over steaming pots of stew, muttered complaints in the stables, silent understanding during punishments. These bonds were a quiet resistance to the grind. Together you learned which knights were cruel, which would look the other way when you stole an extra bite of food, and which corners of the castle offered a moment's peace. Occasionally merchants arrived with bright silks, or travelling performers brought a flash of colour to the grey courtyard, reminding you that a world beyond stone walls still existed. But for now, you were a page, and that single word defined everything: servant, student, survivor. The reality of this first stage shattered any childhood fantasies of shining armour. Becoming a knight was not a matter of courage alone. It was a long apprenticeship in endurance, humility, and uncomplaining labour. Each blistered hand and sleepless night forged something harder than muscle, a quiet resolve to withstand whatever came next. And if you endured, the next step awaited, the gruelling transformation from page to squire, where the chores of servitude gave way to the dangers of real combat, and the shadow of death began to follow every lesson. The years of pagehood slowly hardened you, until the castle walls felt less like a prison and more like a forge. By the time you reached 14, the endless chores, bruises, and whispered lessons had prepared you for the next phase, though no one asked if you were ready. Readiness was never part of the equation. One morning you were summoned without ceremony and told that you were no longer a page. The apron strings of childhood were cut, and you were now a squire. To outsiders it sounded like a promotion, but those who lived it knew better. The duties were fewer in number, but far heavier in weight, and each one carried the possibility of death. As a squire, you were assigned to a specific knight, and from that moment your life revolved around his shadow. Where he went, you went. If he rode into a tournament, you carried his lances and polished his armour until it gleamed. If he rode into war, you followed, often into mud and chaos, with only a heartbeat of warning. Your tasks became intimate and relentless. You learned to buckle every strap of his armour with absolute precision, because a single loose rivet or cracked buckle could mean his death and, by extension, your disgrace. Sweat and grime collected inside every joint of the steel plates, and each evening you scraped, oiled, and checked every hinge until your fingers bled. No one praised you when everything worked perfectly, but everyone noticed the smallest mistake. Training intensified beyond anything you'd endured as a page. The wooden swords of childhood were replaced by live steel, heavy and sharp enough to open flesh with a single careless swing. Sparring sessions left your arms numb and your ribs aching, but there was no room for hesitation. Every strike had to be delivered with balance and controlled aggression. You were taught to mount and dismount war horses, bred to weigh more than a small cart, their temperaments as dangerous as any weapon. The first time you tried to ride one of these towering beasts, its sheer power rattled through your legs and up your spine until your teeth hurt. Falling was inevitable, and each fall carried the risk of a broken bone. But falling and rising again was part of the lesson. A knight needed to keep moving even when the earth itself tried to throw him aside. Alongside the physical punishment came the mental discipline of war. Your knight taught you to read a battlefield, not as a collection of individual jewels, but as a living map of moving lines and sudden dangers. He showed you how to judge an opponent's stance, how to spot a hidden spear wall, how to calculate whether a retreat was strategy or disaster. You absorbed these lessons silently, storing them away like coins for a future that might never arrive. Nights were spent around campfires or in damp tents, listening to older soldiers trade stories that blurred the line between caution and bravado. They spoke of charges that ended in glory and others that ended in slaughter. You listened carefully because every detail might save your life when theory gave way to reality. The first time you followed your knight into an actual skirmish, the world narrowed to the sound of hooves and the metallic scent of fear. You were not there to fight. That privilege was still a few years away. But safety was an illusion. Your job was to stay close, to run messages through a storm of arrows, to drag your knight out of danger if he fell, and to carry orders across a field where every breath could be your last. Imagine lifting a man encased in 60 pounds of steel while mud clung to your boots and enemy soldiers swung blades in your direction. It was not heroic. It was backbreaking, and the reward was usually nothing more than the chance to do it again the next day. Even when the fighting stopped, the work did not. After a battle you tended wounds, negotiated ransoms if your knight was captured, and maintained equipment as if tomorrow's war were already on the calendar. Diplomacy became a skill learned by necessity rather than schooling. A careless word to the wrong soldier could mean the difference between safe passage and a knife in the dark. You learned to bow when needed, to flatter without appearing weak, and to keep secrets that could topple reputations. Every interaction was a test of balance. Too proud, and you invited hostility. Too humble, and you invited exploitation. Despite the danger, there were moments of quiet pride. When you led your knight's horse through a crowded camp and soldiers turned to watch, when your master gave a rare nod of approval after a hard day's ride, you felt a flicker of the honour promised in the stories of old. But these moments were fleeting, quickly buried beneath the next task or the next bruise. For every small victory there were nights of bone-deep exhaustion, hands raw from scrubbing blood from chainmail, and dreams haunted by the screams of the battlefield. The glamour of knighthood seemed farther away than ever, yet each hardship pushed you closer to the title you had been chasing since childhood. By the time the first true winter of your squire years arrived, you had learned to endure cold that cracked your fingers and froze the sweat inside your armour. Snow turned the training yard into a treacherous mire, where horses slipped and men cursed the biting wind. You rose before dawn, tightened your belt, and carried on because the weather, like war, cared nothing for your comfort. Older squires whispered about upcoming campaigns and distant rebellions, their voices tinged with excitement and dread. You listened, calculating risks even as a small part of you longed for the summons that would take you beyond the castle walls. Glory was still a mirage, but the path toward it was carved in the bruises and scars that now marked your body. This was the crucible that transformed a boy into a warrior's apprentice. Every strap buckled, every fall endured, every silent lesson in strategy and survival shaped you into something harder than steel. You were still not a knight, not yet, but the child who had once arrived with a bundle of clothes and wide eyes was gone. In his place stood a squire, battered, disciplined, and quietly determined to survive the brutal climb toward the day when a sword would finally tap his shoulders and grant the title he had already paid for in sweat, pain, and uncounted nights of restless sleep. Chapter 2. Knighthood does not arrive with a single dramatic moment. It creeps toward you in aching muscles and endless responsibilities, until one morning you realize you have crossed another threshold. After years of carrying lances, tending wounds, and scrubbing the stink of battle from iron plates, someone in authority finally decides you are ready for the long night of vigil. There is no fanfare. A steward delivers the message with the same dry tone he might use to announce a grain shipment. You are to prepare for the ceremony of dubbing, the ritual that will mark the end of your squire years and the beginning of your life as a knight. The preparation is less romantic than the songs suggest. First comes solitude. You are led to a small, cold chamber with stone walls that echo every sigh. A single candle flickers in the draught, offering more smoke than warmth. Here you are expected to fast, pray, and reflect on the duties ahead. The priests speak of purification, of cleansing the soul before it accepts the sacred charge of defending the weak and serving God. In practice, you spend the long hours wrestling with hunger, cold, and the dull ache in your knees. Your stomach growls against the silence. The thin blanket smells faintly of mildew. You try to focus on noble ideals, but instead find yourself counting the cracks in the wall or wondering whether anyone would notice if you sneaked a sip of water. The night stretches like an iron chain. Other squires have passed this way before you, some trembling with anticipation, others feigning calm. You wonder which face you wear. Memories of your training rise unbidden, the sting of wooden swords, the weight of a fallen knight as you dragged him through mud, the sound of arrows slicing the air inches from your head. Each memory feels like a test, a reminder of what the title will demand. Sleep is forbidden, but exhaustion plays tricks. At times you imagine the candlelight bending into shapes, ghostly knights of ages past, their armour dented and their eyes unreadable. Are they offering warning or welcome? You cannot tell. When dawn finally seeps through the narrow window, you are led to the great hall. Overnight it has been transformed into a stage of banners and polished wood. Nobles gather in their finest fabrics, priests in embroidered robes, soldiers in the best armour they can borrow. Their whispers fill the air with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. You kneel at the centre, aware of every eye on you. Your name is announced with formal precision, echoing against the stone until it feels like both a summons and a sentence. A hush falls as your lord approaches, sword in hand. The blade that touches your shoulders may not have seen battle. Many lords keep a ceremonial sword polished to a mirror shine and used only for this purpose. Left, then right, the steel taps you lightly, a gesture more symbolic than dangerous, but heavy with meaning. In some traditions, a lord follows the taps with a sharp slap to the cheek or neck, a reminder that pain is part of the calling and that a knight must endure insult without complaint. Whether gentle or stinging, the message is clear. From this moment forward, you are bound to a code that demands more than skill with a weapon. Next comes the oath. You speak words that have been repeated by countless knights before you, pledging loyalty to your liege, obedience to the church, and protection for the weak. You promise to fight only in just causes, to speak the truth, to show mercy to defeated enemies, and to honour women of noble birth. Each vow is pronounced slowly, deliberately, as if careful enunciation might make them easier to keep. Yet even as you speak, a quiet doubt hums beneath the surface. You have seen enough battles to know that mercy is often inconvenient, that truth can be dangerous, and that the weak are not always spared when politics demands their sacrifice. When the final words leave your lips, you rise to polite applause. Nobles nod in solemn approval. Fellow squires, now technically your juniors, clap your shoulders with awkward smiles. Your lord offers a brief but meaningful embrace, and for a heartbeat you feel the weight of the title settle across your shoulders like a fresh layer of armour. A feast may follow if your patron is generous. You are seated higher than before, your cup filled with richer wine, your plate with better cuts of meat. For a few hours you enjoy the illusion that life has changed. In truth, the ceremony is not a conclusion, but a beginning. The hall will empty, the banners will be stored, and the real test of knighthood will begin the moment you ride out to meet responsibilities that no celebration can soften. Your duties expand immediately. You are now expected to lead men rather than follow them, to make decisions instead of merely carrying them out. Your signature on a document binds agreements. Your absence from church is noted. A careless word can offend a noble or spark a feud. The margin for error shrinks, even as the stakes rise. You carry the authority to command soldiers and settle disputes, but with that authority comes the expectation of constant vigilance. A single misstep can undo years of service and stain the reputation you have bled to build. Land may be granted to you if your family holds favour, or your lord wishes to reward your loyalty. With land comes a new kind of battlefield, administration. You must collect taxes, resolve quarrels among peasants, oversee harvests, and maintain roads and bridges. The sword that once symbolized only combat now doubles as a tool of governance. Each decision carries consequences measured not in bruises, but in livelihoods. Fail to secure a good harvest, and your tenants starve. Fail to keep order and rebellion smoulders beneath the thatched roofs of your villages. The songs of minstrels rarely mention these headaches, but they weigh as heavily as any suit of plate. And then there is the irony of mentorship. Almost immediately, you are assigned a squire of your own, a nervous boy who looks at you the way you once looked at your knight. You teach him how to polish armour, how to tighten a saddle strap without bruising the horse, how to sharpen a blade without dulling the edge. At first you correct him gently, remembering your own humiliations. Over time, as mistakes repeat and the urgency of battle presses, your tone sharpens. You hear echoes of your former masters in your own commands, and realize with a start that the cycle is complete. The boy learns through the same mix of exhaustion and quiet pride that once shaped you, and you understand that knighthood is not merely a rank. It is a tradition carried forward one blistered hand at a time. By the end of those first months as a knight, the glamour of the dubbing ceremony fades into a rhythm of relentless duty. You rise before dawn to drill with your men, ride the boundaries of your estate, settle disputes in the hall, and train until sweat stings your eyes and the muscles of your sword arm tremble. The steel plates that once felt like a costume now fit like a second skin, heavy but familiar, a constant reminder that you are both protector and prisoner of the code you swore to uphold. The songs of glory may reach the ears of peasants and poets, but you know the truth. Knighthood is not an end. It is the beginning of a life defined by service, sacrifice, and the quiet endurance of a man who must carry honour like a shield, even when the world around him rewards something far less noble. The celebration of knighthood fades faster than you expect. After the banners are folded and the wine has cooled, daily life closes in with a weight far heavier than the sword that tapped your shoulders. Your new armour, freshly fitted and gleaming, is no mere costume of rank. It is a prison of steel that demands relentless upkeep and punishes even small mistakes. Chainmail and plate must be cleaned, oiled, and inspected after every ride. A single rusted rivet can lock a joint in the middle of combat, and a bent hinge can trap you inside your own protection. You remove each piece with ritual precision, noting dents and scratches that tell the story of every encounter. Your squire scrubs until his fingers wrinkle, hammering out imperfections late into the night while you supervise, knowing that any failure will cost you more than reputation. Wearing the armour is its own battle. The padded gambeson beneath the mail clings to sweat and reeks within hours. Chainmail drapes like a heavy iron curtain over your shoulders, catching every drop of heat. When full plate is added, breastplate, gauntlets, sabatons, greaves, and helmet, you become a walking bell. The helmet is the worst of all. Its narrow visor limits sight to a small rectangle of light, muffling sound and trapping your own breath until the air inside tastes of metal. Movement remains possible. You can run, mount a horse, even roll if trained. But each action costs effort measured in precious breaths and aching joints. Mobility is no longer about speed, but about conserving energy, the way a starving man counts his last coins. Weapons require equal devotion. Your sword is not the slender dueling blade of romantic tales, but a broad, weighty weapon meant for hacking through armour. Its edge is kept sharp, but not razor-thin, a compromise between cutting power and durability. The lance remains the knight's signature tool, a 10-foot spear designed to transform the momentum of a charging warhorse into a single devastating strike. Handling it is as much science as strength. Too loose a grip and the impact shatters your wrist, too tight and the force rebounds through your shoulder like a hammer blow. Maces and axes wait as brutal backups when armour laughs at blades, each designed to crush rather than slice. Shields serve both offence and defence, painted with your coat of arms to declare identity in the chaos of battle. Every piece of gear demands constant practice and relentless attention, because the smallest lapse can mean the swift end of a life spent training. Tournaments, once admired from the safe corners of the hall, now become a proving ground where reputation and survival intertwine. Trumpets sound across a field lined with merchants and cheering crowds, but behind the pageantry lies real danger. The melee pits dozens of knights against one another in a swirling mock battle where blunted swords still break bones and helmets crack under careless strikes. You enter with your team, shield emblazoned, heart pounding behind a breastplate that suddenly feels too tight. Horns blast, the crowd roars, and the field erupts into a chaos that mimics true war. Blows land with bruising force, lances splinter, and every step carries the risk of a fall that could end your career before it truly begins. Victory brings coin and the approving nods of lords who watch from shaded stands. Defeat leaves you limping back to your tent, pretending that bruises and lost wages mean nothing, while secretly tallying the cost of repairs and the price of a damaged reputation. The joust is no safer. Across the tilt rail another knight waits, both of you armed with lances sharpened enough to shatter shields. At the signal you charge, horse thundering beneath you, the world narrowing to the tip of your weapon and the small target of your opponent's chest. Impact arrives like an earthquake. Sometimes you strike true, sending splinters flying and drawing cheers from the stands. Sometimes the blow glances, and you find yourself thrown violently to the ground, gasping for air while the crowd surges with a mixture of awe and morbid delight. Injuries are common, shattered wrists, concussions, and the occasional fatal fall hidden beneath the noise of celebration. Even spectators are not safe. A splintered lance can pierce the stands as easily as a shield. Yet you return again and again because a tournament victory can elevate a knight's status faster than years of loyal service. Lords notice winners. Invitations to greater courts follow. In a world where power rests on perception, visibility is survival. Beyond the tournament field lies the true crucible of a knight's life, war. Campaigns stretch across weeks or months, marching through rain, snow, and mud that clings to boots and horses alike. Camps reek of smoke, sweat, and rotting provisions. Food is monotonous. Salted meat, hard bread, dried peas, and clean water is a luxury. Armor that protects in battle becomes a nightly torment, cold and stiff in the morning, blistering hot under midday sun. You sleep in boots, sword within reach, knowing that a sudden raid can turn slumber into slaughter. When battle finally arrives, it offers no heroic rhythm. Orders are shouted and lost in the wind. Hooves pound like distant thunder. Lances lower as the charge begins, and the ground trembles with the combined weight of men and horses hurtling toward collision. The first impact is a shock that rattles teeth and blurs vision. You might strike your opponent squarely, unhorsing him in a burst of splinters, or you might be the one thrown, scrambling to rise before the next wave tramples you into the mud. If you stay upright, the melee begins, a brutal dance of swords, maces, and shields where precision collapses into sheer survival. You swing at joints where armor gaps, block blows that numb your arm, and fight through the ringing in your ears. Every movement is a gamble measured in inches. Even victory carries scars, deep bruises, cracked ribs, and the memory of eyes that once looked back at you before the final strike fell. After the battle, silence returns like an unwelcome companion. The field is littered with bodies, the air heavy with the metallic scent of blood. Crows circle before the dead have cooled. You walk among the fallen, offering water to some, whispered prayers to others, and quick, merciful endings to those beyond saving. Looters strip armor and weapons for resale, a grim economy no one bothers to hide. Songs will later transform this chaos into tales of noble charges and righteous victories, but you carry the real images, the way a dying man clutches your arm, the hollow stare of a friend who will never rise, the cold weight of the sword you cannot put down. In time, these experiences shape you more than any ceremony or code. You learn to value small mercies over grand gestures, to judge success not by banners captured, but by the number of comrades who return alive. The code of chivalry remains a compass, but one you consult with weary pragmatism. Protect the weak when possible, show mercy when safe, speak truth when it will not cost lives. These are not the lofty ideals sung by poets, but the quiet rules that allow a knight to endure without becoming the very monster he was sworn to fight. And so each morning you strap on your armor, tighten the buckles your squire has checked twice, and ride once more into a world that demands strength, rewards ruthlessness, and remembers only the legends, never the long nights of fear and the private calculations that keep a soldier alive. Chapter 3. Peace after war is never as gentle as the ballads suggest. When the banners are folded and the lords declare victory, a knight's life shifts from open combat to a subtler battlefield of governance and survival. You return from campaign with dents in your armor, bruises hidden beneath linen, and memories that settle like stones in the pit of your stomach. The cheering peasants who line the roads cannot smell the blood still clinging to your gauntlets or hear the echoes of men screaming in the mud. They see only the polished surface of your return, the shining horse, the banner fluttering in the wind, and they imagine triumph. But you know that war is not a conclusion. It is a debt that follows you home. As a newly recognized lord, or at least a landholder of some importance, you now carry responsibilities that weigh more than any sword. Your estate is a patchwork of fields, thatched cottages, and stubborn human needs. The men and women who work your soil do not know you as a hero of battle. They know you as the figure who demands grain at harvest, who sends bailiffs to settle quarrels, who might ride through the village to remind everyone whose name controls the land. Your mornings begin not with the thrill of the charge, but with ledgers. A steward rattles off numbers, bushels harvested, debts unpaid, pigs lost to disease, while you nod as though these calculations were as thrilling as a cavalry assault. Each figure represents food, taxes, and the fragile balance between order and famine. A single failed harvest can turn loyal tenants into desperate rebels. Petitioners queue in the drafty hall, clutching grievances as if they were weapons. One complains that a neighbour's goose has devoured his barley. Another swears that a stolen cow was last seen near the forest. Their voices overlap, a chorus of minor crises demanding your judgment. You sit beneath a banner bearing your coat of arms, listening with the practiced patience of a man who has faced arrows and would almost prefer them to this. Justice must be swift, or at least appear so. Sometimes you levy a fine, other times you order restitution, and on rare occasions you send armed men to inspect the disputed boundary. Your word carries the weight of law, but you know that law without bread is brittle. Each decision is a gamble between fairness, authority, and the quiet simmer of resentment. Disputes among peasants are one thing, quarrels among armed retainers are far worse. When two soldiers argue over grazing rights, or accuse each other of theft, tempers flare and swords rattle in their sheaths. You must intervene with a careful blend of firmness and diplomacy, projecting strength without escalating to bloodshed. A single misjudged punishment can ignite a feud that burns for generations. You remind them of loyalty, of the code of service, of the discipline expected of men who wear your colours. They bow, grumble, and withdraw, but you can feel the tension lingering like smoke after a fire. Tax collection is another trial, one that strips away the glamour of chivalry with ruthless efficiency. Grain, wool, and coin must be tallied and forwarded to your liege lord, who in turn sends a portion to the crown. Some of the harvest you keep to feed your own household and pay your men, but much of it vanishes upward into a chain of demands you cannot control. You suspect that a fraction of every levy ends in a bishop's cellar or funds some noble's embroidery habit, yet questioning the economy of feudal obligation is as futile as questioning the tides. You nod, sign the parchment, and send the ox cart on its way, knowing that every sack of grain represents hours of labour from people who already live one failed crop away from starvation. Your duties extend beyond paperwork and petitions. You oversee repairs to the millstone, arrange timber for winter, and inspect the castle walls for cracks that might invite thieves or invaders. You ride the boundaries of your land, speaking with reeves and shepherds, listening for hints of discontent. Respect is maintained less by affection than by distance. A lord who lingers too long among the villagers invites familiarity, and familiarity breeds complaints. You smile, offer a nod, and ride on, keeping the fragile balance between authority and approachability. The church remains a constant presence, both ally and overseer. A priest serves your estate, leading mass and recording births, deaths, and marriages. You contribute to the chapel's upkeep and make regular donations, not merely from piety, but from prudence. A well-fed priest preaches loyalty. A neglected one might hint at your sins from the pulpit. You confess when required, mumbling half-remembered prayers while calculating how much grain you can spare for the next tithe. Piety is easier measured in coin than in conduct, and you suspect the priest knows it as well as you do. Even within your own household, authority demands constant vigilance. Servants rotate between loyalty, incompetence, and quiet rebellion. The cook complains about the quality of flour. The stable hand insists the hay shipment is late again. A chambermaid grows suspiciously friendly with a visiting knight, and you must decide whether to intervene or look away. Your squire requires constant training. He forgets to tighten a saddle strap, leaves a sword unpolished, or misplaces a gauntlet just as a tournament invitation arrives. You scold, threaten to send him to the monastery, and then end the day with a quiet word of encouragement. You see yourself in his eager eyes and clumsy hands, and you remember the long path you once walked from page to squire to knight. Marriage, if you have entered one, adds another layer of complexity. A wife of noble birth manages the kitchens, supervises servants, and keeps the household accounts with a sharpness that rivals any steward. She reminds you when rents are due, when your cousin's widow expects a letter, and when the priest caught you dozing during Mass. She is both partner and political ally, her family ties forming a web of alliances that can protect or endanger your standing. Domestic harmony is a strategic necessity, and even minor disagreements over feast preparations can echo through the fragile network of noble relations. Seasonal rhythms dictate much of this life. In times of famine, you ration supplies and beg your lord for relief while praying that the peasants do not revolt. In times of plenty, you display generosity with calculated precision. Bread distributed at the chapel door, coins tossed during feast days, to reinforce loyalty without appearing weak. Charity becomes theatre, a performance that maintains order as effectively as any sword. The peasants bow and call you my lord, but you catch the flicker of judgment in their eyes. They know that the same hand that offers bread also collects the taxes that keep them hungry. This is the quiet war of estate management, a conflict fought with parchment and patience rather than steel. It lacks the thunder of cavalry charges and the rush of a tournament tilp, but it requires equal courage. Every decision carries the potential for unrest. Every failure leaves scars on the fragile economy of your manor. You ride through your lands, armour gleaming in the fading light, and peasants stop their work to watch. Some bow with genuine respect, others with silent resentment. You return their gazes and wonder which of them will still be here when the next harvest comes, when the next levy is demanded, when the next rumour of rebellion reaches your hall. The battlefield may be miles away, but the stakes here are no less real. Survival depends not on a single victorious charge, but on countless small judgments, each one a test of the discipline and endurance that define the true weight of knighthood. Night settles over the manor like a thick wool cloak, and with it comes a different rhythm of duty. The clamour of petitions fades, the ledgers close, and the great hall empties of peasants and soldiers until only the low crackle of the hearth remains. You would think a knight, exhausted from campaigns and governance, might collapse into deep sleep, but rest in this world is never simple. Beds are wooden frames stuffed with straw or wool, the linen faintly scented with dust and sweat no matter how often it is washed. Blankets scratch rather than soothe. You sleep in layers, partly against the cold and partly because unexpected summons are always possible. Armour cools beside you on a wooden rack, each piece ticking softly as the day's heat leaks away. You keep your sword within arm's reach. Habit, perhaps, or the lingering knowledge that peace is always provisional. Sleep comes in fragments rather than long, uninterrupted stretches. Old wounds ache in the night. Muscles stiffen from years of training, and the duties of the day replay in relentless detail. Sometimes you are woken by the priest needing a judgment on a late confession, sometimes by a soldier reporting a distant fire, sometimes by nothing more than the creak of timbers settling in the cold. You rise without complaint, moving through the corridors with quiet steps, checking locks and listening for the subtle signs of trouble. Years of campaigning have trained you to sleep lightly, to wake at the faintest change in sound or temperature, and though the war may be far away, the instincts remain as sharp as any blade. When storms roll across the countryside, the manor itself becomes a drum of wind and groaning beams. Shutters rattle. Rain seeps through cracks in the stone, leaving damp trails along the floor. You remember nights in the field when the only shelter was a horse's flank and a sodden cloak, and you tell yourself this is better. It almost is. The fire hisses and pops as if arguing with the storm outside. Servants move like shadows, banking coals, tightening shutters, whispering prayers. The sound of their footsteps blends with the moan of the wind until you cannot tell which noises belong to the present and which are memories of distant battlefields. There are moments of warmth even in these restless nights. After a long day of judgments and inspections, the hall transforms into a quieter kind of theatre. Minstrels sing ballads of heroes who never existed, their voices rising and falling against the stone walls. You listen half-heartedly, knowing the stories are more embroidery than truth, but appreciating the comfort of their familiar patterns. Servants play games of dice or chess on worn boards. Laughter rings out in brief, surprising bursts, reminding everyone that life continues beyond duty. Sometimes you join them, wagering a coin or two, cheating shamelessly when no one is looking, losing grandly when luck turns against you. These small entertainments keep the edges of despair at bay. Feasts are another kind of escape, though they are as much political performance as pleasure. When nobles visit, the hall fills with the scent of roast meat and spilled ale, the tables crowded with trenchers of bread, bowls of stewed fruit, and cups of dark wine. You sit at the high table, close to the hearth, while your wife, if you have one, manages the endless stream of servants carrying platters and pitchers. A juggler or fool might perform, his jokes sharp enough to draw nervous glances from the visiting clergy. You laugh louder than necessary, not because the jest is clever, but to signal that your house is strong enough to tolerate a little irreverence. Every toast, every smile, every carefully measured laugh is part of the ongoing negotiation that keeps alliances intact and rivals at bay. Quieter evenings hold their own appeal. A servant plucks a lute near the fire while your wife embroiders by candlelight, humming half-remembered hymns. You write letters in a hand cramped from years of sword work, recording expenses or drafting cautious replies to distant lords. Sometimes you attempt poetry, scratching awkward verses onto scraps of parchment, half hoping no one will ever read them. Your steward pretends admiration. Your wife hides the worst attempts before guests can find them. These small acts of creation feel like rebellion against a life defined by destruction and duty. Outside the manor, the village sleeps early, but the night remains alive with subtle movements. Wolves prowl the edges of the forest. Bandits test the boundaries of your patrols. You sometimes ride out under the moonlight with a small escort, not because you expect danger, but because the habit of patrol is impossible to break. The cold air sharpens your senses. Hooves crunch over frozen ground. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, and for a moment the will feels balanced, the silence deep enough to drown the noise of memory. Seasons mark the passage of years more than victories or titles. Winter demands rationing and careful storage of grain. Spring brings floods that wash out bridges and delay planting. Summer offers brief ease but threatens drought. Autumn requires the harsh efficiency of harvest and tax collection. Each cycle tests your ability to manage not only the land, but the hearts of the people who depend on it. A generous hand keeps them loyal. A careless demand invites rebellion. You learn to distribute bread during lean months, to host modest feasts after successful harvests, to appear generous while quietly calculating every cost. Charity is never pure. It is a strategy as necessary as sharpening a sword. The people under your care bow when you ride past, calling you "my lord," with voices that mix respect and resignation. You nod in return, but you notice the quick glances they exchange when they think you are not looking. They measure your fairness, your temper, your willingness to listen. Their opinion matters more than any royal decree because their quiet cooperation keeps the manor alive. A starving peasantry tills no fields. A resentful village can harbour bandits or spread rumours that climb the feudal ladder faster than any messenger. Power rests on perception, and perception rests on the countless small interactions of daily life. As the night deepens and the servants retreat to their straw mats, you remain by the dying fire, cup cooling in your hand. The manor is silent except for the soft breathing of dogs by the door. You think of the battles you have fought, and the ones you still fight in ledgers and whispered negotiations. You think of the boy you once were, polishing armour in a distant castle, dreaming of glory. The dream has changed, but never vanished. It lingers in the glow of the coals, in the rhythm of the seasons, in the quiet pride of keeping a fragile world intact. Tomorrow will bring new disputes, new storms, new summons from your Lord. You will rise before dawn, joints aching, mind already calculating. This is the other face of knighthood, less visible than the clash of swords, but no less demanding. It is a life of constant vigilance, of silent victories measured not in captured banners, but in another day of order maintained, another winter survived, another night when the fire still burns and the walls still stand. Chapter 4. Dawn comes early in a knight's world, not with gentle bird song, but with the cold clarity of duties waiting to be met. The first light leaks across the stone walls of your manor, and finds you already awake, stretching stiff joints that remember every fall from a horse and every blow from a tournament lance. The fire in the hall has burned to embers. Servants move like ghosts preparing the day's bread, and the smell of damp earth drifts in through the arrow-slit windows. Before the peasants even step into the fields, you are already at work, because a knight is more than a warrior. He is the pivot around which an entire community turns, and the weight of that responsibility presses down even when there are no battles to fight. Morning begins with inspection. You walk the boundaries of the manor, cloak pulled tight against the chill, your eyes scanning fences, storehouses, and the sky itself for signs of trouble. A sudden shift in clouds can signal an early frost. A broken gate can invite thieves or hungry animals. Every detail matters, for a single oversight might cost lives when winter arrives. Your steward trails behind with a tablet of wax and a nervous readiness, recording your observations as though each word carries the force of law. It does. A decision made before breakfast can shape the fate of the village for an entire season. From the fields comes the low murmur of peasants beginning their work. They glance up as you pass, offering respectful nods or deep bows depending on temperament and memory of past judgments. Some faces carry quiet admiration, others a flicker of suspicion. They know you hold the power to forgive a late tax, or to demand an extra tithe, to protect them from bandits, or to send them to the stocks for poaching a single rabbit. Your presence reassures and intimidates in equal measure. You return their greetings with a measured nod, careful to balance authority with a hint of accessibility. Too much distance breeds resentment. Too much familiarity invites challenge. The tasks of the day unfold like a campaign without banners. Grain stores must be inspected for rot, wells checked for contamination, and new repairs ordered for the wooden bridge that floods every spring. You listen to the reeve, the village-appointed overseer, as he reports on livestock numbers and brewing disputes. His words carry the earthy precision of a man who knows every furrow of the soil and every temper in the village. You weigh each concern, making small but crucial decisions: which families receive extra grain, which boundaries need reinforcing, which rumours require discreet investigation. These choices are not glamorous, but they keep the fragile machine of feudal life turning. Trade is another battlefield, though it smells more of spices than sweat. Merchants arrive with carts creaking under the weight of goods, salt from the coast, iron tools from distant forges, bolts of dyed cloth bright enough to blind the eye. Negotiations begin the moment the wheels stop. Prices are argued in a dance of flattery and veiled threat. You know that a single shrewd bargain can stretch your winter stores, while a careless deal can drain a month's revenue. Years of military service sharpen your instincts for strategy, and you treat every market day as a contest of wits. Sometimes you win a bargain that leaves the merchant grinning anyway. Sometimes you pay a hidden tax in pride. Either way, the game must be played. The church demands its share of your mourning. A priest waits in the chapel, ready to discuss tithes, upcoming feast days, and the moral health of the village. You kneel on cold stone and murmur the required prayers, half your mind on spiritual matters, half on the accounts awaiting your signature. Confession comes next, a ritual, equal parts absolution and politics. You list your sins with careful ambiguity. Perhaps a sharp word to a servant, perhaps a lapse in temper during a dispute, never revealing more than is necessary to maintain the appearance of piety. The priest nods gravely, offers a blessing, and reminds you that the church watches as surely as God. You leave with a sense of both relief and quiet resentment, knowing that faith and feudal duty are forever entangled. By midday, the manor hums with activity. The kitchen roars with the sound of boiling pots and chopping knives as servants prepare the main meal, a hearty spread of bread, cheese, and whatever meat can be spared. You eat quickly at the high table, your mind already on the afternoon's obligations. Petitioners line the hall once more, a miller seeking permission to expand his shed, a widow requesting help with a collapsed roof, a pair of shepherds accusing each other of grazing on forbidden pasture. Each case demands judgment that blends law with pragmatism. You cannot please everyone, but you can maintain balance, and balance is the closest thing to justice in a world where survival depends on cooperation. After the meal comes training, because the sword arm that grows soft invites disaster. Even in times of peace, a knight drills daily. You stride to the practice yard where your squire waits with weapons laid out like surgical instruments. Chainmail glints in the sun as you stretch muscles still sore from yesterday's exercises. The rhythm of combat returns with each swing and parry, the clang of steel echoing across the yard. Sweat stings your eyes, but you continue until your breathing steadies and your movements regain the fluid certainty of long habit. Your squire mirrors your motions, eager and awkward, and you correct his stance with the same sharp precision your own master once used. Every strike is a lesson, every bruise a reminder that skill fades quickly when neglected. The afternoon brings unexpected visitors, a travelling bard seeking shelter, a minor noble carrying rumours from the royal court, perhaps even a wandering merchant with exotic wares. Hospitality is a weapon as much as a virtue. You greet each guest with measured courtesy, offering wine and a seat near the fire while quietly assessing their motives. Information is as valuable as coin, and a careless word over a shared cup can reveal alliances, betrayals, or the faint scent of rebellion. You ask questions that sound like small talk, and store the answers like arrows in a quiver, ready for the next encounter at court or on the battlefield. As the sun lowers, the village begins to quiet, but your work does not end. You review the day's accounts with your steward, approve plans for tomorrow's repairs, and send messengers to neighbouring lords with carefully worded letters. Each letter must balance deference with subtle assertion, a reminder that you are neither servant nor equal, but something between, a knight whose loyalty is valuable but not infinite. These small acts of diplomacy keep the web of feudal relationships intact, a network as fragile and necessary as the chainmail that guards your body. When twilight finally deepens into night, you allow yourself a brief walk along the manor walls. The fields below glow faintly in the moonlight, dotted with the faint fires of peasants finishing their chores. You breathe the cool air and feel the familiar mix of pride and fatigue. Tomorrow will bring new disputes, new bargains, new demands from lord and church alike. You will rise again before dawn, tighten the buckles of duty, and step back into the endless rhythm of a life that is part soldier, part judge, part reluctant bureaucrat. The world remembers knights for their charges across muddy battlefields, but the true test lies here, in the quiet grind of daily command, where each small decision builds or erodes the fragile peace you fight to preserve. The seasons roll forward, and each brings its own set of demands, each with a texture that settles into your bones more deeply than any single battle. Autumn is the most urgent. Harvest must be gathered before the first frost, grain threshed and stored, cider pressed and sealed against winter. You ride from field to field, boots sinking into damp soil, watching peasants bend their backs beneath the fading sun. Every sheaf of barley represents a calculation. How much to keep for the manor? How much to send upward to your lord? How much to reserve for next year's seed? Too generous, and you risk your own stores. Too strict, and you invite quiet rebellion. A good harvest brings relief, but relief is never pure. Each cart of grain leaving the village reminds you that even abundance must be rationed like a soldier's water on a long march. Winter locks the land in silence. Snow settles over the manor roofs and the roads become ribbons of ice. Horses slip and carts stall, isolating the village like a ship trapped in a frozen sea. Inside the hall, the fire burns from dawn until long past midnight, but the cold still creeps through cracks in the stone and stiffens the joints of every living thing. You ration firewood with the same care as grain, knowing that a single careless week can leave the storerooms empty before spring. Entertainment becomes both necessity and strategy. Minstrels are hired when coin allows, their songs carrying warmth where the fire cannot. Dice games, chess matches, and long evenings of storytelling keep spirits from sinking, but also keep eyes on you, the Lord whose generosity or stinginess will be remembered when the thaw returns. It is during these long winters that memory sharpens its claws. The roar of battle may fade, but the faces of those who fell beside you return in the quiet hours when even the dogs sleep. You remember the charge of cavalry across mud-slick fields, the thunder of hooves and the sudden silence when a comrade dropped without a sound. You remember the smell of blood on metal, the cries of wounded men begging for a mercy you could not always grant. No priest's blessing, no feast, no title can soften those recollections. They live beneath the surface, surfacing in dreams so vivid you wake with the taste of iron in your mouth. You rise from the straw mattress, pace the cold hall, and remind yourself that survival carries a different kind of honour, one measured not in victories but in the ability to keep going. Spring brings mud and new complications. Roads flood, bridges wash out, and the rivers swell with a power that mocks human planning. Tax collection resumes as peasants prepare their fields, each payment a negotiation coloured by the memory of how you treated them in winter. You ride to distant hamlets, cloaks spattered with mud, accompanied by a handful of armed men whose presence both reassures and threatens. Children run to see the horses, their laughter piercing the damp air, while their parents bow with the wary respect of people who know that a single order from you can change the course of their year. You offer greetings, inquire about livestock, listen to complaints about wolves or broken mills, and quietly tally the grain owed to your lord. Justice must be visible, but mercy must be carefully measured. A forgiven debt buys loyalty, too many forgiven debts invite contempt. Summer is deceptive. Fields shimmer with green and gold, merchants return with wagons heavy with goods, and the manor hums with the busy optimism of warm days. But beneath the pleasant surface lies the constant threat of disease. Warm weather breeds sickness that spreads faster than any army. You monitor reports of fever as closely as rumours of enemy movement, ordering quarantines, closing wells, and praying that the priest's prayers reach a listening heaven. The same sun that ripens wheat also dries streams and cracks soil, turning abundance into drought with alarming speed. You order the construction of new cisterns, dispatch men to dig deeper wells, and remind your steward to guard the stores of salt that preserve meat when fresh water fails. Every action is both practical and symbolic. The villagers must see that their knight is vigilant, capable, and blessed with the foresight to protect them even from the whims of nature. Amid these seasonal cycles, tournaments reappear like distant echoes of your youth. Invitations arrive from neighbouring lords announcing jousts and melees designed to celebrate feast days or secure alliances. You consider each carefully. A well-chosen tournament can strengthen ties and refresh your reputation, but each trip requires coin, preparation, and the risk of injury that could leave your estate vulnerable. When you do attend, the excitement of the crowd and the thunder of hooves awaken an old thrill, a reminder of the days when glory seemed possible. You polish your armour until it shines, check every strap twice, and mount your horse to ride into the lists. The impact of lance against shield still sends a jolt through your bones. The cheers still quicken your heart, but you notice the difference now. Victories bring less joy than the knowledge that you have survived yet another test and can return home with body and reputation intact. Politics flows through every interaction, like an unseen current. Letters from your lord arrive with demands for taxes or troops, sometimes both. Royal messengers bring news of shifting alliances, distant wars, or the sudden fall of a noble house you once considered untouchable. You respond with carefully worded letters, sealed with your crest, each phrase weighed for both courtesy and subtle assertion of your own worth. A careless sentence can spark suspicion at court. A well-placed compliment can secure privileges that protect your people for years. You attend feasts at neighbouring manors, smiling through endless toasts, listening for hints of unrest, and quietly noting which lords drink too deeply, which wives whisper to which knights, and which families might be poised to rise or fall. Through it all, the squire at your side grows taller and more confident. You watch him polish armour with the diligence of one who understands that life can hinge on a single overlooked buckle. You teach him to mount quickly, to ride with balance, to keep a blade sharp without thinning its edge. Sometimes you correct him with patience, remembering your own awkward years. Other times, when the stakes are higher or fatigue wears thin your temper, you bark orders sharp enough to leave him blinking. He accepts it all, just as you once did, because he knows that every lesson is a shield against a future battle. In his eager questions and clumsy mistakes you glimpse your own past, and in the quiet pride of his improvements you sense the slow turning of the same relentless wheel that once carried you from page to squire to knight. When night finally returns and the manor sinks into uneasy silence, you walk the ramparts alone. The fields stretch dark and endless beneath the stars, dotted with the faint glow of peasant hearths. The air smells of earth, smoke, and the faint sweetness of ripening grain. You pause to listen to the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the heartbeat of the land that depends on your vigilance. Tomorrow will bring more disputes, more letters, more subtle battles fought with coin and counsel instead of swords. The world remembers knights for the thunder of cavalry charges and the glitter of tournaments. But you know that the truest test lies here, in the slow grind of seasons and the quiet courage of keeping an estate alive. The sword may sleep in its scabbard, but the discipline it represents remains, shaping every decision you make until the day comes when another squire stands where you once stood and the cycle begins again. Chapter 5. Age does not arrive in a single season. It creeps in like a quiet fog, softening the edges of days, until you realize that the thunder of hooves no longer calls you with the same urgency it once did. You wake before dawn as always, but the cold seeps deeper into your bones and the old wounds you earned on distant fields ache with a stubborn rhythm of their own. The squire who once looked up to you now matches your stride, his shoulders broadening, his questions carrying a confidence that reminds you of your own impatient youth. He polishes your armour with the reverence of a man tending a relic, and perhaps that is what it has become, a relic of a fading order. The world beyond your manor has begun to change in ways that even a seasoned warrior cannot ignore. Messengers bring news of strange new weapons, black powder that explodes with a crack louder than thunder, muskets that kill at a distance without the honour of a charge. At first, the reports seem like exaggerated tales from merchants seeking to impress gullible nobles, but then you see the truth with your own eyes. A demonstration in a neighbouring lord's field shows a soldier lifting a wooden tube, lighting a fuse, and felling a target before a single knight can lower a lance. There is no clash of steel, no rhythm of sword play, just smoke, a sudden crack, and a man collapsing into the mud. It feels less like warfare and more like sorcery, and it strikes you with a quiet terror that no battlefield ever did. Knighthood, once the centrepiece of military might, now stands on unsteady ground. Armoured cavalry charges that once decided wars are rendered obsolete by disciplined lines of infantry armed with pikes and gunpowder. The skills you spent a lifetime perfecting, balancing the weight of a lance, guiding a warhorse through the chaos of battle, reading the tilt of an opponent's shield, begin to feel like the fading verses of a forgotten song. Young nobles still train in the old ways, but their eyes drift toward engineers and artillery captains who speak of strategies measured in angles and powder charges rather than bravery and steel. You remain respected, but the respect carries a tinge of nostalgia, as if you're a living reminder of a story whose ending has already been written. Within the manor, the signs of change are just as clear. Your armour, once polished weekly, now gathers dust between ceremonies. The squire still oils the hinges and checks the straps, but more out of devotion than necessity. Each dent tells a story of past battles, and you find yourself tracing them with a finger as though touching the ghosts of former glories. Visitors still come to hear those stories, eager for details of jousts and campaigns, but their curiosity feels different now, less like preparation and more like archaeology. Children point at your breastplate with wide eyes, asking if it is real, and you realize that for them knighthood is already half legend. Ceremonial duties replace the raw urgency of war. You attend feasts where heralds announce your name with exaggerated flourish, the old titles ringing hollow in echoing halls. Songs are still sung of knights who rode fearlessly into battle, but the verses always begin with, "In days of old." You raise a cup, smile for the courtiers, and feel the faint sting of being celebrated as something finished rather than vital. At first, you resent the shift, but gradually you recognize the strange freedom hidden within it. Without the constant call to arms, you are allowed to observe, to reflect, to walk the fields of your estate, not as a defender, but as a caretaker. The land itself offers a different kind of challenge, one that demands patience rather than daring. Peasants now carry coins stamped with the king's likeness, and some even possess scraps of parchment permits, receipts, letters that hinted illiteracy spreading quietly through the villages. Children speak of schools instead of squireship, and the blacksmith's son dreams of becoming a clerk. These changes are good for the realm, you tell yourself, even as they whisper of a future where men like you are remembered only in paintings and old songs. The people bow when you pass, but the gesture feels more like courtesy than necessity. You nod in return, accepting that their lives no longer hinge on the swing of your sword. Your own body tells its own truths. Mounting a horse now requires a deliberate effort where once it was a single, fluid motion. The weight of your sword, though unchanged, seems to pull more heavily against your belt. Training sessions in the yard leave your arms trembling long after the last swing, and though you continue to practice, you sense that skill alone can no longer hold back the tide of time. The squire notices your slowed reflexes but says nothing, offering a steadier hand when fastening your armor, adjusting the straps with a care that carries both respect and quiet concern. His silence speaks volumes, a recognition that the wheel is turning and he will soon take the place you once fought to earn. Letters from your liege grow fewer and more perfunctory. Where once you were summoned for border disputes or sudden raids, now you are asked only for grain tallies, tax reports, and the occasional ceremonial presence at court. The battles still occur, but they are planned by men with maps rather than swords, their victories measured in logistics rather than valor. Your role has become a formality, a nod to tradition in a world increasingly defined by gunpowder and coin. You ride to these assemblies in polished armor, aware that the gleam of steel now serves more as pageantry than protection. Yet there is solace in this twilight. You find time to write, not the stiff reports once demanded by your lord, but reflections meant for no audience but yourself. You describe the smell of wet earth after a cavalry charge, the texture of a tournament lance splintering against a shield, the quiet dignity of a village dance where no one knows your name. Sometimes you attempt to capture the contradictions of a life spent balancing brutality with a code of honor that was more compass than commandment. You know that the words may never be read, but the act of setting them down feels like a final duty, a way of preserving the truth behind the legends. Evenings grow quieter as the years advance. The hall that once rang with the laughter of squires and the clang of practice swords now echoes with softer sounds, the scratch of a quill, the creak of aging beams, the distant murmur of villagers sharing news beneath the stars. You walk the ramparts at dusk, leaning on a cane you once would have scorned, and watch the fields stretch into shadow. Somewhere in those fields lies the boy who left home at 7 to begin the path to knighthood, the squire who once polished another man's armor, the young warrior who rode into battle believing that honor could be won with a single courageous charge. You know now that honor is something quieter, earned not in a moment of triumph, but in the long endurance of service. The steady maintenance of a world that will forget your name even as it benefits from your vigilance. You hand your sword to your grown squire one evening without ceremony. He takes it with both hands, eyes shining with the same mixture of fear and excitement you once carried. No words are exchanged because none are needed. The cycle turns, as it always has. Your armor may rust, your banners may fade, but the discipline, the patience, and the stubborn insistence on carrying the code forward remain. You walk back to the hall under a sky thick with stars and feel, for the first time in years, a deep and quiet peace. The age of knights may be ending, but the lessons of knighthood endurance, responsibility, the courage to act even when the world shifts beneath your feet, will outlive the clang of swords and the roar of cavalry charges. And in that realization, you find a final kind of victory. The slow fading of the night's age continues in ways both obvious and subtle. Days begin with the same rituals: inspection of the manor grounds, quiet prayers in the chapel, the steady rhythm of meals and meetings. But you feel the difference in how people look at you. Their eyes still show respect, yet it is the respect given to a monument, not to a commander. Children who once begged for stories of battle now speak of merchants' caravans and the strange new thundersticks soldiers are learning to fire in distant garrisons. They trace the seams of your old gauntlets with curious fingers, asking whether such heavy armor was really worn in combat. You smile and tell them yes, though you see in their expressions that the armor already belongs more to legend than to living memory. The changes extend beyond curiosity. Farmers speak of markets expanding in distant towns, of coins travelling farther and faster than lances ever could. Roads improve, carters move goods in greater quantities, and the clink of trade drowns the clang of swords. You ride along these roads and notice the subtle erosion of your own authority. Peasants bow, but their livelihoods depend less on your protection than on the merchants who buy their grain. Literacy creeps through the countryside, carried by clerks and travelling friars. Children of blacksmiths dream of becoming scribes. Millers' daughters learn to read prayers and letters, and the old order of service through birth begins to blur at its edges. You tell yourself this is good for the realm, yet a quiet ache settles in your chest when you realize that the values you once embodied, bravery, discipline, the art of war, are no longer the surest path to survival. Court summons now arrive rarely and with little urgency. Where once you were called to ride against raiders or negotiate fragile truces, you are now invited to festivals or asked for grain tallies. The letters carry the tone of polite tradition, as though your presence serves only to decorate an event with the nostalgia of a fading era. When you do attend, you wear your armor more for ceremony than protection. The weight is familiar, comforting even, but you can feel the way others view it, as costume rather than shield. Heralds announce your name with dramatic flourish, and the crowd applauds as if applauding a memory. You raise a cup in acknowledgement, offering a practiced smile while silently measuring how quickly the cheers fade once the musicians strike their next tune. Tournaments continue to flicker across the social calendar like embers of a dying fire. Invitations arrive on thick parchment sealed with wax, promising jousts and melees in honour of feast days. You sometimes accept, driven by habit as much as desire. The lists still thrill you. The blare of trumpets, the smell of trampled grass, the sudden crack of lance against shield. But the excitement now carries a bittersweet edge. Younger knights ride with the reckless energy you once claimed, their eyes fixed on victory and the favour of noble spectators. You compete well enough to earn respectful nods, but each tilt leaves your arms heavy and your breath short. Victories bring polite congratulations rather than fear or envy. You begin to realise that the tournament field has become less a test of skill and more a theatre of remembrance, a place where the rituals of knighthood are reenacted for an audience that knows the world has moved on. Even within your own estate, time leaves its mark. The steward now handles most of the daily disputes, presenting you with decisions only when absolutely necessary. Younger men lead patrols and oversee harvests. Your squire, once a boy fumbling with straps and buckles, now moves with the easy confidence of a seasoned warrior. He speaks to peasants with calm authority, settles quarrels without seeking your advice, and keeps the ledgers in a steady hand that suggests he already understands the duties of a lord. You watch him with quiet pride, remembering your own ascent through the same unending chain of service. The cycle turns as surely as the seasons, and you know that soon the sword you once carried into battle will rest more comfortably in his grasp than in yours. At night, the dreams return more vividly than ever. Some bring the roar of battlefields long past, the thunder of cavalry charges, the metallic scent of blood in cold air, the sudden silence of fallen comrades. Others are softer, the page's nervous first lesson, the glow of a festival fire, the laughter of friends who never returned from campaign. You wake with these memories heavy on your chest, sometimes comforted, sometimes haunted, always aware that they belong to a world slipping steadily into history. The dreams are not nightmares. They are reminders of a life lived at full intensity, a life now settling into reflection. You write more often, filling parchment with thoughts that blend confession and chronicle. You describe the sound of a lance shattering on impact, the weight of armour after a day's march, the smell of wet horse on a cold morning. You try to capture the quiet victories too. The moment a starving village accepted your help, the way a frightened squire steadied his sword after a single encouraging word. Perhaps no one will read these pages. Perhaps they will be discovered generations from now, when knights are nothing more than illustrations in dusty books. It does not matter. Writing gives shape to the truths that battle songs cannot contain, the truths that minstrels polish into legend, while you know the reality of mud, fear, and the stubborn persistence of duty. Your evenings grow calmer, and in that calm you begin to see the purpose that has always run beneath the surface of war and governance. You walk the fields at sunset, greeting peasants by name, noting the strong harvests and the quiet contentment in their eyes. They are no longer dependent on your sword for safety, yet they still look to you for fairness, for steadiness, for the reassurance that someone remembers the old codes even as the world moves on. Their respect is not the charged fear of earlier days. It is something deeper and perhaps more enduring. It is trust. One evening, as the last light fades and the village torches flicker to life, your grown squire approaches with a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside lies the sword you once carried into your fiercest battles, its edge still sharp despite the years. He asks if you wish to keep it near your bed as always. You study the blade, tracing the familiar nicks and scratches, and feel a strange release. You tell him to store it in the great hall instead, where it can be seen but not wielded. He hesitates, understanding the weight of your decision, then bows and carries it away. For the first time in decades, you sleep without the comfort of steel within reach. The next morning feels different, not weaker, not emptier, but clearer. You rise with the sun, joints aching but spirit steady, and walk through the manor with unhurried steps. The banners in the hall still hang, though their colours have faded. The villagers still labour, though their methods have changed. The world continues, as it always will. You understand now that your legacy is not the battles you fought or the tournaments you won, but the quiet order you maintained, the lives you steadied, and the example you set of service shaped by discipline and softened by mercy. The age of knights may be ending, but the essence of knighthood honour as a choice made daily, even when no one is watching, remains alive in the land you once defended with sword and shield. Chapter 6. The battlefield is a place no minstrel's song can fully capture, and the first time you ride into it as a knight, you understand why older men spoke of war with the measured quiet of confession. Marching to battle begins long before the clash of steel. Armies gather over weeks, swelling into cumbersome masses of men, horses, carts, and foul-smelling supplies. The air grows heavier as thousands move together, each step grinding mud deeper into boots, each breath clouded with the stench of animals, sweat, and food gone sour. Sleep is broken by the creak of wagons and the curses of soldiers whose tempers fray faster than their belts. You try to hold discipline, but even the strongest bonds begin to unravel under the endless plod of a campaign. When at last the enemy is sighted across a broad plain, nerves tighten like bowstrings. Orders pass down the line, shouted, repeated, and often garbled by the noise of men and the distance between commanders. You adjust your armour, tighten your horse's girth strap, and try to quiet the restless shifting of the beast beneath you. The sky seems different on the morning of battle, the clouds sharper, the air colder, as though the world itself braces for what comes next. Your companions offer grim smiles or muttered prayers, each man rehearsing his own private ritual for courage. Some whisper names of loved ones, others cross themselves repeatedly. A few stare into the distance with the blank expression of men who have already accepted their fate. The charge begins, not with elegance, but with thunder. Hooves pound the earth, lances lower, and the air fills with the guttural roar of men desperate to project strength, even as fear churns inside them. The ground trembles. Your vision narrows to the thin slit of your visor, and all thought collapses into the rhythm of horse and heartbeat. The moment of impact is absolute. No gradual escalation, no careful duel, but a collision of flesh, wood and steel that leaves both rider and opponent reeling. You strike or are struck, and in that instant the stories of honour and glory vanish. Survival becomes the only truth. If you remain upright, the melee swallows you next. Blades flash, shields shatter, men scream. The noise is unbearable. The constant hammering of metal against metal, punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone. You swing your sword in wide arcs, not searching for heroics but for openings. An exposed armpit, a gap in chainmail, the back of a knee. Training guides your movements more than thought, for hesitation means death. Mud splashes your face, blood slicks your gauntlets, and the stink of iron fills your mouth until every breath tastes of violence. Falling is a danger greater than any blade. Once unhorsed, a knight becomes prey for trampling hooves or the quick thrust of a spear through visor or joint. Armour that once protected you turns into a prison, trapping you in the mud as you struggle to rise. If you are lucky, your squire drags you to safety, hauling your weight across churned earth while arrows rain down around him. If not, you are left to claw at the ground while the battle surges past, praying that the chaos will somehow ignore you. Many die not from wounds but from suffocation beneath the press of men and metal, buried alive in the frenzy of combat, and yet the fight continues because there is no other choice. You block, strike, stumble, and rise again, each movement a negotiation between life and death. Fear never disappears. It only sharpens or dulls depending on the moment. Some knights crumble beneath its weight, frozen in place until a blade finds them. Others, yourself included, learn to channel it, to let fear narrow the world into the next step, the next swing, the next breath. You are not courageous because you feel no fear. You are courageous because you keep moving despite it. Hours blur into a haze of violence. Commander's orders fade into the din, banners fall and rise again, and the line between friend and foe dissolves in the chaos. More than once you swing at a figure only to realize too late it wears your colors. More than once you glimpse an enemy's eyes behind a visor, wide with the same terror you feel. This is the reality no poem speaks of. The recognition that your opponent is not a faceless beast but a man just as desperate to survive. You kill him anyway because hesitation is death. Later, when the field quiets, you will remember his face and it will visit you in dreams. When at last the battle ends, it is not with trumpets or cheers but with exhaustion. You stagger from the field, armour dented, body trembling, ears ringing from hours of relentless noise. Around you lie the dead and dying, comrades and enemies indistinguishable in the mud. Crows already circle overhead, their cries sharp and merciless. You kneel beside the wounded where you can, offering water or a whispered prayer, sometimes ending a life with your blade because it is kinder than leaving the man to suffer. Looters move among the corpses, stripping armour, rings, even boots from bodies not yet cold. You turn your eyes away, unwilling to stop them, knowing that for many the spoils of war are the only way to survive another winter. Back in camp, silence reigns. Men sit around fires, too tired to speak, cleaning wounds in grim quiet. No one boasts of bravery or tallies their kills. They know better. Those who laugh too loudly tonight will weep tomorrow when fever sets in or an infection takes hold. You remove your armour piece by piece, laying each dented section aside with reverence, knowing that every flaw could have been the crack that ended you. Your hands shake as you clean your sword, not from fear but from exhaustion so deep it feels permanent. You stare at the stains on your gauntlets and cannot tell whether the blood is yours or another's. In the days that follow, the story of the battle changes. Minstrels compose songs of noble charges, lords give speeches about righteous victories, priests declare that God favoured your side. You ride through villages where children throw flowers, where peasants cheer and bow as though you embody the triumph of justice. You nod, smile, wave, because that is what is expected. But in your mind you see the broken bodies, the faces twisted in terror, the smell of burning and blood. You carry that reality quietly, knowing it will never appear in the official chronicles. The battlefield you survived and the battlefield they celebrate are not the same. and you understand now, more than ever, that knighthood is not the shining path of legend, but the endurance to keep riding into horror, to return with scars, and to bear the silence of truths that few will ever want to hear. You rise with the dawn, muscles locked and heavy from hours of fighting, and step into a camp that smells of smoke, damp earth, and the metallic tang of blood that no amount of washing can disguise. Around you, men move slowly, their eyes dulled by exhaustion and the shock of survival. Some clean weapons with methodical care, others sit in silence staring at nothing, their thoughts caught between gratitude and grief. Victory, if it has been claimed, offers no comfort. The field is littered with proof that triumph and tragedy share the same ground. Your first duty is to account for the living and the dead. Messengers ride out to count banners and tally casualties, while squires comb through the wreckage searching for their masters. You walk among the wounded, offering a steadying hand or a brief word of reassurance, though you know that many will not last the day. The surgeons, if such a name can be given to men armed with knives and boiling waterwork with brutal efficiency. Limbs are sawed off without anaesthetic, wounds are cauterized with red-hot iron, and prayers rise with the screams. You hold down a young soldier as the healer cuts away a gangrenous arm, feeling his body convulse beneath your grip. Later, when the cries finally fade, you wonder whether the mercy of death might have been kinder. Looters prowl the field with the shameless pragmatism of survivors. They strip armor, pry rings from swollen fingers, and pull boots from corpses that have not yet cooled. You do not stop them. To some, scavenging is the only wage war will ever pay. Knights who fall with gilded hilts or finely wrought chainmail are plundered first, their noble birth no protection against the economy of death. You notice peasants from nearby villages among the scavengers, quick and silent as foxes, carrying away anything that might feed a family through winter. Part of you wants to curse them. Another part remembers that hunger does not respect rank. At night, the campfire conversations turn to ghosts. Men speak of comrades who fell, of narrow escapes, of the strange quiet that settles in the heart when death passes close but does not claim you. Some confess sins to the nearest priest, hoping to bargain with a god whose intentions remain inscrutable. Others drink until words blur and memory softens, their laughter brittle and too loud. You remain mostly silent, listening to the murmurs of the living while your mind drifts back to the field, replaying moments you wish you could forget, the sudden collapse of a horse beneath its rider, the shocked expression of an enemy whose life ended at the edge of your sword, the sight of a child's doll crushed into the mud where a village once stood. These images will follow you home and linger long after the wounds have healed. The march back to familiar lands offers no relief. Roads once vibrant with the bustle of travellers now reek of decay as you pass villages scorched by raiders or stripped bare by foraging troops. Farmers return cautiously to blackened ruins, scavenging what little remains. You distribute grain from the army's stores when you can, knowing it is never enough. Children stare at your armour with a mix of awe and fear, their eyes reflecting the knowledge that the men who promise protection can also bring devastation. You offer them a nod or a coin, gestures meant to soothe but incapable of erasing what they have seen. When you finally reach the manor, the familiar walls feel different. The stone towers stand as they always have, but the air carries the weight of what you have brought back. Memories of screams, the sour stench of blood, the endless rhythm of death and survival. Servants rush to greet you, but their smiles falter when they notice the dents in your armour and the scars that mark your face. The squire takes your sword with reverent hands, cleaning it carefully as though removing the residue of violence could also cleanse the memories attached to it. You wash in cold water until your skin is raw, yet the smell of the battlefield clings stubbornly, a reminder that some stains are carried beneath the skin. Peace, when it finally arrives, feels less like relief and more like an uneasy truce. You resume the duties of lordship, overseeing harvests, settling disputes, inspecting repairs. But every mundane task is haunted by the knowledge that war can return without warning. You find yourself checking the horizon more often, listening for distant horns, waking in the night at the faintest sound of horses. The villagers sense it too. They work their fields and mend their fences, but their eyes flick to the manor whenever rumours of conflict reach the market. They know that their lives are tied to the readiness of the knight who commands their defence, even if that defence now feels fragile against the thunder of gunpowder and the cold efficiency of pike formations. Letters from the king arrive praising your service, filled with flowery thanks and promises of favour. You read them without pleasure. The words feel thin against the reality of what you have witnessed. No royal decree can restore the men buried in shallow graves or quiet the dreams that wake you in the dark. You sign the responses with careful formality, sealing them with wax while your mind drifts back to the cries of wounded soldiers left on the field because there were too many to save. Recognition is a currency that buys no peace. In quieter moments you walk the old training yard where once you sparred with the reckless eagerness of youth. The wooden posts still bear the scars of countless sword strikes, but the yard is empty now, the air filled only with the distant calls of crows. You lift a practice blade and feel the familiar weight, but the movements that once came easily now carry the heaviness of memory. You swing, parry, and thrust not against an opponent, but against the ghosts of every man you have faced. Each motion is a remembrance, each breath a reluctant prayer for those who fell. Evenings end with the same ritual. You sit before the hearth with a cup of watered wine, staring into the flames as they crackle and shift. The firelight reflects in the polished steel of your helmet resting on the table beside you, a silent companion that has shared every triumph and terror. You think of the code of chivalry you once swore to uphold, bravery, mercy, the defence of the weak, and wonder how often you have honoured it, how often you have failed. Perhaps the code was never meant to be a shield against the horrors of war, but a reminder to reach for decency even when surrounded by brutality. The thought offers a fragile comfort, a reason to rise each morning and continue the quiet work of keeping your people safe. Outside, the night deepens. The stars scatter across the sky, indifferent to the struggles of men. Somewhere beyond the horizon another army gathers, another campaign begins, another knight mounts a horse with a heart full of hope and fear. You know that the cycle will continue long after your name is forgotten. Yet as you sit in the fading glow of the fire, you accept that survival is itself a form of victory, and that the truest measure of a knight lies not in the battles he wins, but in the humanity he manages to keep when the world demands he surrender it. Chapter 6. The battlefield is a place no minstrel's song can fully capture, and the first time you ride into it as a knight, you understand why older men spoke of war with the measured quiet of confession. Marching to battle begins long before the clash of steel. Armies gather over weeks, swelling into cumbersome masses of men, horses, carts, and foul-smelling supplies. The air grows heavier as thousands move together, each step grinding mud deeper into boots, each breath clouded with the stench of animals, sweat, and food gone sour. Sleep is broken by the creak of wagons and the curses of soldiers whose tempers fray faster than their belts. You try to hold discipline, but even the strongest bonds begin to unravel under the endless plod of a campaign. When at last the enemy is sighted across a broad plain, nerves tighten like bowstrings. Orders pass down the line, shouted, repeated, and often garbled by the noise of men and the distance between commanders. You adjust your armour, tighten your horse's girth strap, and try to quiet the restless shifting of the beast beneath you. The sky seems different on the morning of battle, the clouds sharper, the air colder, as though the world itself braces for what comes next. Your companions offer grim smiles or muttered prayers, each man rehearsing his own private ritual for courage. Some whisper names of loved ones, others cross themselves repeatedly. A few stare into the distance with the blank expression of men who have already accepted their fate. The charge begins, not with elegance, but with thunder. Hooves pound the earth, lances lower, and the air fills with the guttural roar of men desperate to project strength, even as fear churns inside them. The ground trembles. Your vision narrows to the thin slit of your visor, and all thought collapses into the rhythm of horse and heartbeat. The moment of impact is absolute. No gradual escalation, no careful duel, but a collision of flesh, wood, and steel that leaves both rider and opponent reeling. You strike or are struck, And in that instant, the stories of honor and glory vanish. Survival becomes the only truth. If you remain upright, the melee swallows you next. Blades flash, shields shatter, men scream. The noise is unbearable. The constant hammering of metal against metal, punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone. You swing your sword in wide arcs, not searching for heroics, but for openings. An exposed armpit, a gap in chainmail, the back of a knee. Training guides your movements more than thought, for hesitation means death. Mud splashes your face, blood slicks your gauntlets, and the stink of iron fills your mouth until every breath tastes of violence. Falling is a danger greater than any blade. Once unhorsed, a knight becomes prey for trampling hooves, or the quick thrust of a spear through visor or joint. Armor that once protected you turns into a prison, trapping you in the mud as you struggle to rise. If you are lucky, your squire drags you to safety, hauling your weight across churned earth while arrows rain down around him. If not, you are left to claw at the ground while the battle surges past, praying that the chaos will somehow ignore you. Many die not from wounds, but from suffocation beneath the press of men and metal, buried alive in the frenzy of combat, and yet the fight continues because there is no other choice. You block, strike, stumble, and rise again, each movement a negotiation between life and death. Fear never disappears. It only sharpens or dulls depending on the moment. Some knights crumble beneath its weight, frozen in place until a blade finds them. Others, yourself included, learn to channel it, to let fear narrow the world into the next step, the next swing, the next breath. You are not courageous because you feel no fear. You are courageous because you keep moving despite it. Hours blur into a haze of violence. Commander's orders fade into the din, banners fall and rise again, and the line between friend and foe dissolves in the chaos. More than once you swing at a figure only to realize too late it wears your colors. More than once you glimpse an enemy's eyes behind a visor, wide with the same terror you feel. This is the reality no poem speaks of. The recognition that your opponent is not a faceless beast, but a man just as desperate to survive. You kill him anyway because hesitation is death. Later, when the field quiets, you will remember his face, and it will visit you in dreams. When at last the battle ends, it is not with trumpets or cheers, but with exhaustion. You stagger from the field, armor dented, body trembling, ears ringing from hours of relentless noise. Around you lie the dead and dying, comrades and enemies indistinguishable in the mud. Crows already circle overhead, their cries sharp and merciless. You kneel beside the wounded where you can, offering water or a whispered prayer, sometimes ending a life with your blade because it is kinder than leaving the man to suffer. Looters move among the corpses, stripping armor, rings, even boots from bodies not yet cold. You turn your eyes away, unwilling to stop them, knowing that for many the spoils of war are the only way to survive another winter. Back in camp, silence reigns. Men sit around fires, too tired to speak, cleaning wounds in grim quiet. No one boasts of bravery or tallies their kills. They know better. Those who laugh too loudly tonight will weep tomorrow when fever sets in or an infection takes hold. You remove your armor piece by piece, laying each dented section aside with reverence, knowing that every flaw could have been the crack that ended you. Your hands shake as you clean your sword, not from fear but from exhaustion so deep it feels permanent. You stare at the stains on your gauntlets and cannot tell whether the blood is yours or another's. In the days that follow, the story of the battle changes. Minstrels compose songs of noble charges. Lords give speeches about righteous victories. Priests declare that God favored your side. You ride through villages where children throw flowers, where peasants cheer and bow as though you embody the triumph of justice. You nod, smile, wave, because that is what is expected. But in your mind you see the broken bodies, the faces twisted in terror, the smell of burning and blood. You carry that reality quietly, knowing it will never appear in the official chronicles. The battlefield you survived and the battlefield they celebrate are not the same, and you understand now, more than ever, that knighthood is not the shining path of legend, but the endurance to keep riding into horror, to return with scars and to bear the silence of truths that few will ever want to hear. You rise with the dawn, muscles locked and heavy from hours of fighting, and step into a camp that smells of smoke, damp earth, and the metallic tang of blood that no amount of washing can disguise. Around you, men move slowly, their eyes dulled by exhaustion and the shock of survival. Some clean weapons with methodical care. Others sit in silence, staring at nothing, their thoughts caught between gratitude and grief. Victory, if it has been claimed, offers no comfort. The field is littered with proof that triumph and tragedy share the same ground. Your first duty is to account for the living and the dead. Messengers ride out to count banners and tally casualties, while squires comb through the wreckage searching for their masters. You walk among the wounded, offering a steadying hand or a brief word of reassurance, though you know that many will not last the day. The surgeons, if such a name can be given to men armed with knives and boiling waterwork with brutal efficiency. Limbs are sawed off without anaesthetic, wounds are cauterized with red-hot iron, and prayers rise with the screams. You hold down a young soldier as the healer cuts away a gangrenous arm, feeling his body convulse beneath your grip. Later, when the cries finally fade, you wonder whether the mercy of death might have been kinder. Looters prowl the field with the shameless pragmatism of survivors. They strip armor, pry rings from swollen fingers, and pull boots from corpses that have not yet cooled. You do not stop them. To some, scavenging is the only wage war will ever pay. Knights who fall with gilded hilts or finely wrought chainmail are plundered first, their noble birth no protection against the economy of death. You notice peasants from nearby villages among the scavengers, quick and silent as foxes, carrying away anything that might feed a family through winter. Part of you wants to curse them. Another part remembers that hunger does not respect rank. At night, the campfire conversations turn to ghosts. Men speak of comrades who fell, of narrow escapes, of the strange quiet that settles in the heart when death passes close but does not claim you. Some confess sins to the nearest priest, hoping to bargain with a god whose intentions remain inscrutable. Others drink until words blur and memory softens, their laughter brittle and too loud. You remain mostly silent, listening to the murmurs of the living while your mind drifts back to the field, replaying moments you wish you could forget, the sudden collapse of a horse beneath its rider, the shocked expression of an enemy whose life ended at the edge of your sword, the sight of a child's doll crushed into the mud where a village once stood. These images will follow you home and linger long after the wounds have healed. The march back to familiar lands offers no relief. Roads once vibrant with the bustle of travellers now reek of decay as you pass villages scorched by raiders or stripped bare by foraging troops. Farmers return cautiously to blackened ruins, scavenging what little remains. You distribute grain from the army's stores when you can, knowing it is never enough. Children stare at your armour with a mix of awe and fear, their eyes reflecting the knowledge that the men who promise protection can also bring devastation. You offer them a nod or a coin, gestures meant to soothe but incapable of erasing what they have seen. When you finally reach the manor, the familiar walls feel different. The stone towers stand as they always have, but the air carries the weight of what you have brought back. Memories of screams, the sour stench of blood, the endless rhythm of death and survival. Servants rush to greet you, but their smiles falter when they notice the dents in your armour and the scars that mark your face. The squire takes your sword with reverent hands, cleaning it carefully as though removing the residue of violence could also cleanse the memories attached to it. You wash in cold water until your skin is raw, yet the smell of the battlefield clings stubbornly, a reminder that some stains are carried beneath the skin. Peace, when it finally arrives, feels less like relief and more like an uneasy truce. You resume the duties of lordship, overseeing harvests, settling disputes, inspecting repairs. But every mundane task is haunted by the knowledge that war can return without warning. You find yourself checking the horizon more often, listening for distant horns, waking in the night at the faintest sound of horses. The villagers sense it too. They work their fields and mend their fences, but their eyes flick to the manor whenever rumours of conflict reach the market. They know that their lives are tied to the readiness of the knight who commands their defence, even if that defence now feels fragile against the thunder of gunpowder and the cold efficiency of pike formations. Letters from the king arrive praising your service, filled with flowery thanks and promises of favour. You read them without pleasure. The words feel thin against the reality of what you have witnessed. No royal decree can restore the men buried in shallow graves or quiet the dreams that wake you in the dark. You sign the responses with careful formality, sealing them with wax while your mind drifts back to the cries of wounded soldiers left on the field because there were too many to save. Recognition is a currency that buys no peace. In quieter moments you walk the old training yard where once you sparred with the reckless eagerness of youth. The wooden posts still bear the scars of countless sword strikes, but the yard is empty now, the air filled only with the distant calls of crows. You lift a practice blade and feel the familiar weight, but the movements that once came easily now carry the heaviness of memory. You swing, parry, and thrust not against an opponent, but against the ghosts of every man you have faced. Each motion is a remembrance, each breath a reluctant prayer for those who fell. Evenings end with the same ritual. You sit before the hearth with a cup of watered wine, staring into the flames as they crackle and shift. The firelight reflects in the polished steel of your helmet resting on the table beside you, a silent companion that has shared every triumph and terror. You think of the code of chivalry you once swore to uphold. Bravery, mercy, the defence of the weak, and wonder how often you have honoured it, how often you have failed. Perhaps the code was never meant to be a shield against the horrors of war, but a reminder to reach for decency even when surrounded by brutality. The thought offers a fragile comfort, a reason to rise each morning and continue the quiet work of keeping your people safe. Outside, the night deepens. The stars scatter across the sky, indifferent to the struggles of men. Somewhere beyond the horizon another army gathers, another campaign begins, another knight mounts a horse with a heart full of hope and fear. You know that the cycle will continue long after your name is forgotten. Yet as you sit in the fading glow of the fire, you accept that survival is itself a form of victory, and that the truest measure of a knight lies not in the battles he wins, but in the humanity he manages to keep when the world demands he surrender it. Chapter 9. Dawn breaks across the tournament field with a pale light that feels almost shy, revealing the marks of yesterday's contests in churned mud and scattered splinters of wood. Merchants stir in their tents, calling to one another as they rekindle cooking fires and lay out wares for a fresh day of trade. The smell of roasted meat mingles with the damp scent of earth, a reminder that even the grandest displays of chivalry are built upon the same basic appetites that drive any marketplace. You rise with the rest, joints protesting slightly as you stretch the stiffness from your limbs, and watch as your squire begins the quiet work of preparing your armour. Each buckle and strap is inspected with a diligence born not of fear, but of ritual. The field may no longer carry the mortal danger of war, but the lessons of discipline remain the same. As the sun climbs higher, the lists come alive once more. Trumpets sound, banners snap in the breeze, and the crowd gathers to cheer knights who ride not for conquest, but for the fragile thrill of spectacle. You take your place among the competitors, noting the variety of faces around you. Some are veterans like yourself, their movements deliberate and seasoned by years of combat. Others are young men chasing a dream that belongs more to ballads than to the world that awaits them beyond the tiltyard. You see in their eyes the same mixture of excitement and fear that once fueled your own charges. The ground trembles beneath the hooves of restless horses, and for a brief moment you feel the old rush of anticipation, a heartbeat of connection to the battles that shaped you. The jousts proceed with a rhythm that is both exhilarating and strangely hollow. Lances shatter, shields splinter, and the crowd erupts with every clean strike, but you cannot ignore the sense that the stakes have shifted. Victories bring applause and perhaps a modest purse, but no longer the strategic advantages that once followed a well-fought tournament. Lords attend for entertainment, not recruitment. Merchants place wagers for amusement, rather than to measure the worth of potential allies. You ride with precision, striking true and saluting opponents with the grace expected of your station, Yet you know that each pass is more pageant than preparation. The thunder of hooves that once heralded power now serves as echo of a fading age. Between bouts you walk the edges of the field, observing the mingling of social worlds that only a tournament can produce. Nobles in embroidered finery share shaded benches with prosperous merchants, while peasants crowd the outer rings, craning for a glimpse of the action. Children chase each other through the aisles, imitating knights with wooden sticks, their laughter carrying over the din. You smile at their enthusiasm even as you wonder what future awaits them. Will they grow to wield swords, or pens, or the strange new weapons that send smoke and thunder across the battlefield? Perhaps they will need none of these, their lives shaped instead by trade routes and printed words rather than the edge of a blade. The thought is both comforting and disorienting, a reminder that progress often feels like the slow erasure of the familiar. When the final trumpet signals the end of the day's contests, the field transforms from arena to fairground. Musicians strike up lively tunes as spectators stream toward the taverns and merchant stalls. You follow at a measured pace, accepting polite nods and occasional congratulations from those who watched your performance. Some recognize the crest on your shield, a relic of campaigns long past, and bow with a respect that carries more nostalgia than fear. You return their gestures with quiet dignity, aware that your presence represents not only personal skill but an entire tradition slowly yielding to time. The squire trails behind you carrying the battered lance that earned you a narrow victory, his eyes bright with the thrill of the day. That evening, the nobility gathers for a banquet beneath a sprawling pavilion lit by hundreds of candles. Tables groan under the weight of roasted game, spiced wines, and platters of sweetmeats. Courtiers trade witticisms and wagers, while musicians weave melodies that glide above the steady hum of conversation. You take your seat among them, the warmth of the fire seeping into your bones as servants refill goblets and present endless courses. Here, too, the rituals of the old order endure, the careful seating of rivals to avoid open quarrels, the subtle signalling of alliances through shared toasts, the measured courtesy that conceals ambition behind polished smiles. You play your part with the ease of long practice, offering praise where it is expected, deflecting probing questions with a well-timed jest or a sip of wine. Yet beneath the surface you sense the shifting tide. The talk at the high table drifts from heroic charges to trade profits, from knightly codes to the efficiency of gunpowder artillery. Merchants speak with growing confidence, their fortunes granting them influence once reserved for those born to noble blood. Younger nobles listen with interest, eager to invest in ventures that promise wealth without the hazards of war. You watch these exchanges with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. The values you were raised to defend, honour, loyalty, the sacred duty of protection, are being quietly replaced by calculations of profit and risk. It is not betrayal, merely evolution, but it leaves you feeling like a figure from an illuminated manuscript, admired but increasingly irrelevant. When the banquet finally winds down, you step outside into the cool night air. The noise of the feast fades behind you, replaced by the gentle creak of tents settling in the breeze and the distant laughter of revellers. Above, the stars scatter across the dark sky with the same indifferent brilliance that has witnessed every victory and defeat of your life. You breathe deeply, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, and feel a calm acceptance settle over you. The world is changing as it always has, but change does not erase the worth of what came before. The code you follow may be fading from public life, yet it remains alive in the quiet decisions you make each day, in fairness to your tenants, in kindness to your squire, in the steady fulfillment of promises few now remember. You return to your tent where your squire waits, polishing the dents from your shield with careful strokes. He looks up as you enter, eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and unspoken questions. You offer him a brief nod and a few words of guidance, passing on lessons that cannot be written in any manual. He will inherit a world very different from the one that shaped you, but the principles you teach, discipline, courage, compassion, remain timeless. As you settle onto the cot and let exhaustion pull you towards sleep, you reflect on the day's contests, not as victories or losses, but as living memories, small affirmations that the essence of knighthood endures even as its outward trappings fade. Outside, the night deepens, and the stars keep their silent watch, indifferent yet eternal, just as they were when you first rode onto a battlefield so many years ago. Morning arrives with a damp chill that seeps through even the thickest cloak. The tournament field lies quiet now, the last scraps of yesterday's festivities trampled into the mud. Merchants pack their wares with practiced efficiency, while servants dismantle pavilions that only a night ago glowed with candlelight and laughter. You watch in silence, absorbing the strange melancholy of endings. The cheers, the music, the clash of lances, all have vanished, leaving only footprints and the faint scent of smoke. It reminds you of battlefields after the fighting, when the roar of combat fades and the reality of impermanence settles like dust over the living and the dead. Your squire approaches leading the horse, its breath steaming in the cold air. Together you begin the slow journey back to your estate, the road slick with thawing frost. Along the way, villagers wake to the first tasks of spring. Farmers mend fences damaged by winter storms. Children scatter seed across muddy furrows. Dogs bark at passing travellers, while crows wheel above newly ploughed fields. Life continues with a rhythm that feels both eternal and newly fragile. You nod to those who greet you, exchanging a few words of encouragement, though you sense that your presence carries less authority than it once did. Respect remains, but the awe once reserved for a knight has softened into something closer to polite acknowledgement. Travel gives you time to think, and your thoughts drift toward the future. You have seen the new weapons, gunpowder cannons that batter castle walls to rubble, muskets that pierce armour from distances once thought safe. No amount of training or courage can stop a musket ball. The knight's charge, once the most feared manoeuvre in Europe, is now little more than a ceremonial tradition. You remember the first time you heard the dull thunder of cannon fire on a distant battlefield and felt the ground tremble beneath your horse. It was not fear of death that unsettled you, but the realization that the very foundation of your world was shifting beneath your feet. A lifetime of skill with sword and lance suddenly seemed like a carefully crafted language that fewer and fewer people cared to speak. By the time you reach the manor, the sun is low and the sky streaked with the soft hues of approaching dusk. Servants rush to unload gear, while the steward greets you with a list of matters requiring immediate attention. Roof tiles loosened by winter winds need replacing. A dispute over grazing rights threatens to spill into violence. A merchant waits in the hall with an offer to purchase wool at a price suspiciously generous. You shed your travelling cloak and step into the familiar rhythm of governance, the clamour of estate life replacing the cheers of the tournament crowd. Here, in the daily negotiations of harvests and taxes, lies the true battlefield of a knight's later years. Every decision carries consequences, and victories are measured not in captured banners, but in seasons of sustained order. Night falls before you can finish the day's work. In the great hall, a modest supper is served, bread still warm from the oven, a joint of roasted lamb, a cup of spiced wine to cut the lingering cold. Your squire sits nearby, quiet but attentive, ready to discuss the tournament. He speaks with excitement of the matches, of the speed of the horses and the skill of certain riders. You listen, offering occasional observations, but your mind lingers on the subtle changes you witnessed. The smaller crowds, the merchants outnumbering the knights, the polite applause that replaced the once deafening roar of admiration. The boy sees glory, you see transition. Neither of you is wrong, but only one of you understands how quickly admiration can fade when history moves on. Later, when the hall is empty and the fires burn low, you walk the manor grounds beneath a sky scattered with stars. The cold bites through your cloak, sharp and invigorating, and the night smells of damp earth and wood smoke. You pause near the training yard where the practice posts stand like silent sentinels, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of strikes. Memories surface with unsettling clarity. The sting of splintered lances, the cries of comrades, the metallic taste of fear before a charge. You remember faces, some of men you fought beside, others of those you fought against, each etched into your mind more sharply than any heraldic crest. Time has dulled none of it. The battles may be decades behind you, but they remain as vivid as the stars overhead. Inside, your old armour rests on its stand, polished to a muted glow. You run a hand along the cool steel, tracing dents and scratches that mark the milestones of your life. Each imperfection carries a story, a near-fatal strike deflected at the last instant, a desperate defence against overwhelming odds, a tournament pass where victory came by a hair's breadth. These memories are heavy but not unwelcome. They remind you of a time when every decision felt immediate, and every heartbeat carried the weight of survival. You know you could never return to that life, but neither can you entirely leave it behind. The armour may grow cold and ceremonial, but it remains part of you, as inseparable as the scars beneath your tunic. Sleep is slow to come. Old instincts keep you half awake, ears attuned to the creak of timber and the soft shuffle of servants preparing for morning. You think of the letters waiting on your desk, reports of new markets opening across the sea, of engineers designing weapons that can breach any fortress. You think of your squire, eager to earn his spurs in a world that may no longer need men like him. You wonder if you should encourage his training or guide him toward the skills that will matter in the years ahead, reading contracts, managing estates, navigating the politics of trade. In the quiet hours before dawn, these questions weigh heavier than any sword. Eventually you rise and stir the dying embers of the hearth, watching sparks drift upward like fleeting memories. Outside, the first birds call to the coming day, their voices clear against the stillness. You straighten, feeling the familiar stiffness of age and the steady pulse of purpose that remains despite it. The world is changing faster than you ever imagined, but change does not erase the worth of service. Whether in battle or in stewardship, the true calling of a knight has always been to protect, to guide, and to endure. You tighten the belt of your cloak, open the door to the cold pre-dawn air, and step forward once more into a future that no longer belongs to your kind, but still requires your quiet strength. Chapter 10. The first true warmth of spring settles over the countryside as you ride the familiar path from the manor to the old battlefield. Years have passed since hooves last thundered across these rolling hills, yet the ground still whispers of violence. Grass grows thick over shallow depressions where men once fell, and wildflowers sprout in the shadow of weathered marker stones. Farmers now plough fields where archers once stood, their oxen trudging slowly over soil enriched by the unspoken history buried beneath. You dismount at the ridge where cavalry once assembled and gaze across the quiet expanse, the breeze carrying nothing but the scent of damp earth and budding trees. Here, silence speaks louder than any bard's song, telling of a time when your life was measured in charges and clashes, in the raw calculus of survival. Standing there, you feel the familiar weight of memory settle over your shoulders. You recall the frantic preparations of a campaign, the sharpening of blades, the creak of leather straps, the nervous laughter of young squires trying to mask their fear. You remember the chaos of battle, the sky dark with arrows, the ground trembling under the charge, the sudden shock of impact when lances splintered and men screamed. Each detail remains as vivid as the day it happened, yet it feels impossibly distant, like a story you once read by firelight rather than a life you lived with your own blood and bone. Time has dulled the sting of fear, but sharpened the clarity of loss. You can name the men who fell here, see their faces in the flicker of memory, and you know that no victory was ever worth the cost. You kneel beside a crooked stone half buried in moss, brushing away dirt to reveal faint carvings long eroded by rain. The name is unreadable now, but you remember the man, a fellow squire turned knight whose laughter once filled the barracks. He died in the first charge of a campaign that dragged on for months, his body never recovered, his family left with nothing but rumours and a hastily written letter. You whisper a quiet prayer, not for glory or redemption, but for remembrance. In this simple act lies the essence of the code you swore to uphold. Honour is not in the killing, it is in the acknowledgement of those who carried the same burden and paid the same price. The ride back to the manor is unhurried. Along the way you notice signs of a changing world that once would have escaped your attention. A miller repairs a water wheel using iron fittings purchased from a distant city. Children chase each other carrying scraps of paper covered in printed letters. proof that literacy spreads faster than swords can hold it back. A merchant caravan rumbles along the road, guarded not by knights but by men with crude firearms slung casually across their backs. They nod in greeting, respectful but unawed, and continue on their way. You return the nod, suppressing the instinct to judge. Progress does not ask for permission, and you have lived long enough to know that resisting it only leads to bitterness. Back at the manor, the steward meets you with news that reinforces what you have already sensed. A nearby town has built a permanent market square, drawing peasants away from the villages under your protection. Younger tenants speak of leaving to apprentice with craftsmen who promise wages and independence. Even the priest mentions that the bishop encourages schools rather than tournaments, arguing that knowledge is a more enduring defense than steel. These changes might once have filled you with unease, but now you accept them with a quiet grace. The world is moving toward a future where strength of mind outweighs strength of arm, and you take comfort in knowing that the ideals you hold dear, justice, responsibility, compassion, can survive such a transition. Your squire greets you in the training yard, eager to demonstrate a new drill he devised while you were away. His movements are sharp and precise, the product of years of discipline, yet there is an ease in his posture that speaks of a man equally comfortable with pen and sword. He speaks of attending a university in a distant city, where he can study law while continuing his martial training. The idea would have sounded absurd when you were his age, but now it feels inevitable. You offer your blessing, recognizing that the next generation must walk paths you cannot fully understand. The lessons you have given, discipline, honor, the quiet strength to protect, will travel with him even as the form of knighthood evolves beyond recognition. That night you host a modest feast to celebrate the coming of spring. Villagers gather in the great hall, filling it with laughter and the rich smell of roasted lamb. Children dance to the music of a wandering minstrel, their bright eyes reflecting the flicker of torchlight. You sit among them rather than at the high table, sharing cups of ale and listening to stories of harvests, marriages, and small adventures. The people speak to you not as a distant lord but as a trusted elder, their respect born not of fear but of familiarity. It is a different kind of honor, quieter and perhaps more lasting than the glory once promised on the field. Later, when the hall grows silent and the last embers fade, you retire to your chamber where your old armor stands in the corner. You no longer polish it every night, but you keep it clean enough to catch the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Running a hand along the cool steel, you feel the echoes of every charge, every duel, every desperate defense that defined your youth. The armor no longer fits as it once did, yet it remains a part of you, a testament to years spent in service. You realize that its true value lies not in its ability to protect, but in the stories it carries. Stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of duty. Before sleep claims you, you write a short letter to your squire, though he sleeps just down the hall. In it, you share a simple truth, learned through years of triumph and loss. Strength is not measured by the weight of armor or the sharpness of a blade, but by the ability to act with integrity when no one is watching. You seal the letter with wax and place it beside his training sword, a quiet gift for the morning. Outside, spring rain begins to fall, soft and steady, washing the last traces of winter from the earth. You close your eyes to the rhythm of the rain and feel a peace deeper than any victory, a peace born of service fulfilled and a life lived with purpose even as the world moves on without the clamour of nights. The days lengthen and the air grows warm enough to carry the smell of tilled soil deep into the manor's stone corridors. Spring has fully arrived, but the season feels different now. In younger years it meant the start of campaigns, the restless sharpening of blades, the nervous anticipation of orders that might send you riding across distant frontiers. Now it signals a quieter urgency. Farmers rush to plant before the next rain. Merchants push their caravans along muddy roads toward expanding markets, and letters from distant towns bring news of trade guilds and newly printed books instead of war summons. You walk the manor grounds each morning with a cane rather than a lance, greeting tenants by name, listening to their concerns about seeds, taxes, and the strange machines that blacksmiths whisper will soon grind grain faster than a dozen men. Their worries are practical, their hopes simple, and in their eyes you see the slow but unstoppable transformation of the world you once defended with steel. Inside the great hall, the daily rhythm of governance continues. The steward spreads ledgers across the table, tallying grain stores, wool sales, and the rents collected from tenant farmers. Disputes are settled with words rather than weapons. A boundary quarrel between neighbouring villages, a complaint over the quality of timber delivered for roof repairs, a disagreement about fishing rights along the river. You listen carefully, weighing each side before rendering a decision. The work is less dramatic than battle, but no less demanding. A single careless ruling can sour alliances and spark feuds that linger for generations. Where once you measured success in captured banners, now you count it in seasons of quiet harvests and children growing to adulthood without fear of raids. Letters from beyond your lands arrive with increasing frequency. A cousin writes of bustling cities where apprentices earn steady wages in workshops illuminated by glass windows. Another speaks of scholars debating philosophy in public squares, their arguments spread by printing presses to villages like your own. The Church sends notices of new doctrines and reforms, urging greater education for the laity and careful accounting of tithes. Each message carries the subtle weight of inevitability. The world is moving toward knowledge and trade, toward a future where decisions are made in council chambers and universities rather than in the clash of armoured riders. You read these letters by the fire at night, the crackle of burning logs mingling with the soft scratch of your scribe's quill, and you feel both curiosity and a faint, unshakable melancholy. Your squire, now nearly a man grown, brings his own tidings of change. He speaks eagerly of learning to read Latin more fluently, of copying maps and drafting contracts under the tutelage of a visiting scholar. His eyes shine with ambition, not only to earn knighthood, but to navigate the wider opportunities opening beyond the manor walls. You encourage his studies even as you continue his martial training. Sword drills still fill the yard with the ring of steel, and mounted exercises still leave both of you breathless. But you can see that his future will not be bound solely to the tilt yard or the battlefield. He will inherit a world that demands quick wits as much as quick reflexes, and you take quiet satisfaction in knowing he will be ready for either. On feast days, the villagers gather in the hall to share music and stories, their laughter echoing against the old stone walls. You sit among them rather than at the high table, drinking from the same mugs and listening to their tales of new tools, distant relatives, and occasional mischief. Children play near the hearth, weaving wooden swords through imaginary battles before collapsing in giggles. Watching them, you feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the fire. They know little of the dangers that once defined these lands. To them, war is a story told by elders, a fading legend like dragons or enchanted forests. Their world is safer, more predictable, and in their carefree games you glimpse the true reward of years spent in service, the creation of a peace so deep that its origins are already forgotten. Sometimes, late at night when the hall is empty and the moonlight spills across the flagstones, you walk the quiet corridors and reflect on the path that brought you here. You remember the endless drills of your youth, the bruises hidden beneath training tunics, the cold vigils before your knighting, the first terrifying charge into a real battle. You remember comrades who fell and those who survived, the victories celebrated and the losses mourned in silence. Each memory arrives with the clarity of starlight, unsoftened by time, yet alongside the ache of remembrance comes a profound contentment. You endured, you protected, you kept the code alive in a world that often rewarded betrayal more than honour. And though the age of knights is fading, the principles that guided you remain as sharp as the day you first raised a sword. Before retiring, you visit the armoury where your old armour stands as a silent witness to these years. Its once bright plates are dimmed by countless polishings, each dent and scratch a testament to battles fought and survived. You run a hand along the cool metal, feeling the faint ridges where blows once landed. The armour no longer fits your aging frame, yet it still carries the weight of purpose. You realise that it was never merely protection, but a vessel for the ideals it represented: courage, duty, mercy. Those ideals now live not in steel but in choices. The fairness of a judgment, the patience shown to a frightened tenant, the guidance offered to a young squire searching for his own path. As dawn approaches, you pause by the window and look out over fields silvered by moonlight. The manor sleeps, the village beyond silent except for the distant bark of a dog. Somewhere in the darkness a nightingale sings, its clear notes carrying through the cool air. You listen, breathing in the quiet assurance that the world endures beyond the clamour of war and the rise and fall of empires. Your life has spanned the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another, but in this stillness you find peace. The banners may fade, the tournaments may vanish, and the charge of knights may become a story for minstrels, yet the meaning of service remains. You have lived it, guarded it, and passed it on, and that, you know, is enough.